Hello and welcome to the show. If you watch the show fairly often or know me at all, you know that I have a heart for organ donation. My late husband received a double lung transplant almost 20 years ago. His didn't go so well. He only survived 6 weeks. But what that selfless donation from a family I've never met gave to us was a chance to try. So today we're talking with Nicole and Maddie. Maddie's a transplant recipient, and Nicole is a program director of an organization called SODA, Student Organ Donation Advocates. Thank you so much for being here, Nicole. I've been receiving emails from you for a couple of years, so it's nice to finally get to meet you, so to speak, and share the SODA story. So thanks again.
Thank you, Lisa. The feeling is definitely mutual. I've followed your work for a few years, so I love getting an email from you that set up this interview. So thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Well, let's get started. Let's talk about your role in SODA and just how it came to be. And also let's talk about SODA itself and let's give a good explanation of what exactly it is and who it benefits. Obviously students, but the background behind it.
Yeah, so our story, SODA story, really begins in 2009 with the Miller family. Sarah Miller ended up being the founder of SODA, but when she was 12 and her older sister Laura was 14, Laura was experiencing headaches for a few months. They went to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician just told her to take some ibuprofen and that it would be okay. It was probably just puberty or growing pains. But then one morning, Laura suffered a series of seizures and she was rushed off to the hospital. A few days later, she was pronounced brain dead. The family was approached about organ donation, and their parent, Susan and Ron, supported organ donation, but it was a difficult conversation to have when they were talking about their 14-year-old daughter who was healthy just a few days earlier. A social worker also approached Sarah and Laura's younger sister, Rachel, about organ donation. And Sarah and Rachel were really adamant that Laura should be an organ donor because they didn't want another family to experience a loss like they did. So Laura became an organ donor, and she saved the life of Trish, a special education teacher in New York State, through liver transplantation. And Trish is still doing great with Laura's liver today. But after Laura passed away, people had asked Sarah what it was like to lose her sister. And those conversations were difficult. But Sarah was able to shift the conversations into something positive when she was able to share that Laura was an organ donor and was able to save a life. Along with shifting the conversation, she was able to see a shift in people. People were being really receptive about organ donation, and they would say, hey, I want to be an organ donor now, or I would let my loved one be an organ donor too. And Sarah realized how powerful storytelling was and how she could convince others to be organ donors through Laura's story. So she would go to driver's ed classes, she would go to her youth group and share her story wherever she could. She wanted to continue her story, sharing her story and Laura's story in college. So one of the first things she did in 2014 when she started school at Washington University in St. Louis was flip through the student group registry and see if there was an organ donor group, and there wasn't. But she knew a great next step would be to go to a volunteer training to advocate for organ donation in the St. Louis community. So she did that, and she met two other students who were passionate about organ donation. Together, they formed the first ever SODA chapter in 2014 at Washington University. I got involved a year later in 2015 when I was a first-year student at Washington University in St. Louis. That SODA chapter was hosting a tour of a local organ donation transplant suite, and I thought I wanted to go to medical school at the time. So I was really excited to see this tour, but I didn't know the tour was going to be about organ donation. I didn't know much about organ donation, but at that event, I met Sarah. She told me about Laura, and I became an organ donation advocate.
That's the power of storytelling. You were talking about the power of storytelling, and I'm a huge believer that it can save lives. It can most definitely improve lives. And having that conversation with people, sometimes it just requires a conversation about anything to get people to start to think or lean a different way from what they, one, may not know anything about, or two, have a strong opinion that hadn't been swayed until having a conversation with someone who has a differing opinion. And the thing about organ donation, and we know the statistic is high, I don't know it off the top of my head. I believe it's used to be around 90+% of people support organ donation, but there's only not all of those people are registered donors. And one of the things I've tried to do on this show over the years is educate people about what it takes to be a donor. We think that the heart on our driver's license is enough, and it helps, but it's not enough. And so we work with organizations like Donate Life America, the National Donor Registry. Your organization most definitely gets students thinking about organ donation, but it's also the conversations we have with our family. And so going all the way back to Sarah's family, they had a good idea, even in that time of absolute tragedy, of what to do because they'd had the conversations with their loved ones, maybe even with their providers. But how much do you feel like when you're talking to students and you're getting out and sharing SOTA and your mission, do you think they've never even had that conversation? They've, for one, probably not thought about it because a lot of young people don't think about their demise, rightfully so. They're young and healthy. But what have you learned about the conversations and how that impacts your success to get people not only thinking about donation, but actually registering?
Yeah, having that conversation is so important. And it's kind of the magic of what we do because SOTA is really about peer to peer advocacy. And so it's students telling students to talk to their families about organ donation, or students talking to adults and telling their children to consider organ donation. And I think without this push, not a lot of people would know about organ donation. I feel like a lot of students learn about organ donation for the first time through a driver's ed class or a health class right before they get their driver's license. And then a lot of students are motivated to make an impact and save lives after that. So we have lots of high school chapters that are formed after that initial conversation during a driver's ed class or a health class, which is super exciting to see.
Well, and then that requires them to have a conversation with their parents, right? Because as a youngster, they have to have permission up to a certain age to become a registered donor. So they need to make sure their parents are educated about it too. So I have such respect for the work that you're doing, and I'm excited. So now we're going to go take a break, and then when we come back, Maddie will join us. And she has a remarkable story. 3 years now, she's been living with her liver donation, and she's going to tell her SOTA story. But when we'll talk with Maddie, and then we'll come back, and the three of us will chat. Okay, so we'll just take a break. You won't see Nicole when you get back, but you will see her in the third segment. So hold tight, and we'll come back with Maddie in just a moment. We are back talking about organ donation, SOTA specifically, Student Organ Donation Advocates. And we are here now with Maddie. Maddie, you are a 3-year liver transplant patient, and I'm just so glad you're here and willing to share your story with us. You look like the picture of health, which is wonderful.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
You're welcome. So let's talk about your story. Some people think a liver patient at your age, how could that be? But obviously you needed one in a bad way, and you were able to receive that liver, and now you're living a healthy life. Tell us a little bit about your health history and what led to your transplant, and then we'll talk a little bit about what got you involved with SOTA and the chapter that you started at George Mason University.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I was 12 years old when I started having weird symptoms, nosebleeds, overall fatigue, and we didn't think too much of it at first. And then there were a series of doctor's appointments that ultimately led to blood work being run, and I was in acute liver failure. I was transferred immediately to the transplant institution closest to me, where a battery of tests was run. They found that my liver had a blood clot in it, and because of that, it was failing. At that point in time, I was listed status 1A on the liver transplant list, which is the highest a person could be listed. So the hope was that I would receive a liver within 24 and 48 hours, as if you're status 1A, you really don't have much longer than that.
Right.
But there my transplant team wasn't convinced that they, you know, this was the end all be all right then and there. They wanted to try to prolong my life, allow me to recover a little bit and get me in a more stable position to receive a transplant. So I had a shunt placed to help get blood flow through my liver, and it worked.
And a TIPS procedure.
A TIPS procedure, yes. So yeah. A lot of times it's an older population that has it, but I was the youngest at my institution that they had put it in, so they weren't quite sure how it was going to work, and it did. So I actually kind of got to go back to living a somewhat normal life, but we still were struggling to find why I had clotted my liver. And I was then diagnosed a few months later with a chronic red blood cell cancer that caused the clots. So I continued living knowing that it would ultimately end in a liver transplant. My liver could not recover from the initial hit. And in 2019, I was 16 at the time, I was relisted for a transplant. I had been healthy enough for a while to come off the liver transplant list. And
It's always better to have rebuilt your strength than to go into surgery when you're given a couple of days to live. Obviously, everything else is working better. All of your other organs have a chance to catch up with that TIPS procedure. You felt good about that?
Yeah, no, and it gives you time a little bit mentally to prepare to. At 12, I didn't really understand what happened to me or what I was about to go through. So then,
and it's an interesting process too to be listed, because you go through all kinds of evaluations, psychological, physical, all the things that go along with it. A lot of people would never know that if they hadn't gone through a transplant evaluation, but also it's a timing thing, because they don't want to transplant you too soon, because that's the starting mark of a whole different life for you. So it's good that they were able to find that balance for you. And then by the time you were transplanted, did that feel like, yep, this is when it had to happen?
It did to a point. You're never fully prepared, I don't think. I was listed, at 16, and you're just constantly waiting for the phone to ring, because at any point in time you can get this call and your life completely changes. So anytime the phone would ring, you jump and kind of be like, oh my goodness, is this it? And COVID hit kind of right whenever I was listed. And so it kind of threw a lot of transplant wait times and kind of listing and transplant centers into a little bit.
Logistics is a huge thing in transplant.
Yes. So we really weren't sure. We weren't confident at all that I would receive a call very quickly. We expected some time after COVID hit. And in June, I had woken up one morning and my heart was racing, and I was like, I don't know why I feel so nervous right now. And we heard the phone ring.
Wow.
And we pretty much knew right then and there. And yeah, I went into it, and it was a perfect match. It was like my doctor said, everything we had been waiting for. At that point, I had waited 298 days on the transplant list. We knew we were going to try and get as close to a perfect match as possible because I had time.
So when you were originally listed and taken off the list, then relisted, you waited those 200 plus days. Almost.
Yeah, this is just the relist. Yes.
Okay, so that wasn't the combined time. That was, you got listed. They knew you needed one, and then it took 280 days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so your involvement. So you obviously had a successful surgery, and I've heard from people that with transplant is, you obviously have the aches and pains of having had a surgery, but you do wake up feeling better. All the things that sent you into transplant are gone. Those reasons are gone. So did you feel that sense of like renewed health that you probably hadn't expected?
Yeah, I didn't quite know what to expect. I was still functional whenever I received the call. So I went into it relatively healthy for my situation. And I really just expected to come out of surgery and be like, this is gonna, be a struggle to recover from this. It's a big surgery. And on day 2, they kind of weaned me off some of the meds, and I was a little more conscious and with it. And I just sat there for a second, and my mom was with me. And I looked at her and was like, oh my goodness, I feel so much different. And we both just kind of looked at each other. We're like, it's crazy. My eyes, I was never crazy like jaundice or yellow, which sometimes liver failure patients can get. But my eyes, the whites of my eyes were just so white. And I just felt almost light. Like that's how I described it. It was, I felt like I could kind of like fly almost. I was obviously still in quite a decent amount of pain from the incision and everything else, but I definitely did feel that almost like just crazy.
When you're chronically ill like that, sorry to interrupt you. Imagine when you're chronically ill like that, you don't realize that you don't feel that great. You know, you have a baseline that's normal for you. I have a friend who I've met through the transplant community and the cancer community. He had the same cancer as I did. I had Hodgkin's disease at 24. He had it 3 times. And then he developed leukemia from the treatments. And then he developed cardiomyopathy and ended up having a heart transplant. And when I met him, he was about a 5-year transplant patient, and he was trained for an Ironman triathlon. And he is now like a 16, 17-year heart transplant and 30-something year cancer survivor. But he'd said when he went in for surgery and came out, he was quite ill for a long time, cardiomyopathy, and really limited in his activities and things. But he said he didn't realize he hadn't heard his heartbeat in so long because it was so faint and so barely there that coming out and hearing this thump, he kind of didn't know what that was. He'd forgotten. So I think it's really a miracle. Obviously, it's a miracle, and it's a gift. And I wonder too, when you think about what it means to you that somebody was willing to give this gift to you. When we come back, we'll talk about SODA and the organization and how you're giving back with that organization. But you specifically, your story, what do you feel? And have you had contact with the family? And what is your position on that?
I haven't had contact with my donor family, but at some point I do wish to reach out and connect with them. It's a very complicated feeling, I think, especially while you're waiting. You have gotten the call and you're getting prepped for surgery, and they just keep telling you to come in and they tell you congratulations, and you know that your life is about to completely change and this is your second chance, and at the same time you are completely aware that for somebody else they have just lost their life.
Yes.
I know very little of my donor, but I know that they were roughly 20 years old, and in great health whenever they passed. And that was something I struggled with post-transplant, knowing that somebody else had passed. And because of that, I continued to live on. And I've worked through it, and I've started to my little motto is, I'm not living for one, I'm living for two now. Everything I do, my donor does with me. And it's almost like having a little sidekick almost with you.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yes, I enjoy, knowing that I'm keeping part of them safe, I'm keeping part of them alive. It's kind of what helps me, there are still some days that I have health challenges just from the nature of everything I've been through. But it's what kind of drives me to keep going. And I'm a pre-medical student, and I am working to try and kind of help other people in our position. And it's kind of what keeps me going.
It's the ripple effect. It's the ripple.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's take a break. When we come back, let's talk with add Nicole back to the conversation. I want to talk about SODA specifically because you started a chapter, and I want to let other students, because apparently, according to Nicole, no, there isn't one in Washington State. So I want specifically the audience here to know how they might go about starting a chapter right here in Washington State or anywhere you're listening. We'll be back in just a moment. We are back talking with Nicole and Maddie. We've heard Maddie's personal story as a liver transplant patient for 3 years and counting for many years to come. And I just want to talk, you started your own chapter at your university, George Mason University in Virginia. Talk about that process. And obviously you were motivated by your own story, but was it a difficult process? Were people receptive to it? How did that go for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever I got into college and started at college, I knew that I wanted to do something with organ donation advocacy. And I was trying to figure out a way to do so on my college campus. And I wasn't getting very far with any of my own personal ideas. And one day my mom sent me on Instagram something from Soda National. I'd never heard of Soda at that point and had no idea kind of what they were. And so I looked them up and realized that it was something I was hoping to do. I found two of my friends at Mason, was like, hey, I've got this plan. I want to start a Soda chapter here. And they, of course, were on board. So we started our Soda chapter together. It was super easy through Soda. And then we became a registered student organization at George Mason University. So we are able to now host events and kind of be more active on campus.
Well, that was my next question. So the duplication is there, which is wonderful. They already have it in place. And I'd imagine, Nicole, that's one of the greatest outreaches you receive is someone wanting to start a chapter at their college. So tell us about, Nicole, what kind of events does that mean? What does having a Soda chapter at your college mean toward having the ability to bring awareness and those types of things? What are some examples?
The magic of what we do, like I said, it's peer-to-peer advocacy and it's student-led advocacy. So we really leave it up to students to do what's best for their campus. But that being said, if you don't know where to start, we got you covered. We have tons of how-to guides on our website that tell you how to advocate on campus, and as well as event ideas. So we tell people how to host donuts and donors events or how to invite a speaker onto campus to share their story. So we totally got your back covered if you don't know where to start.
When you started, what was the first event that you recall, Maddie, that you held?
The first event that we held was at our George Mason Get Connected Fair. So all the student-led organizations come out and they have little booths, and you're looking to kind of invite people into whatever organization you are. So my vice president and I held a booth at the Get Connected Fair. And it kind of was all about Soda, what we do, what we were looking to do on campus. And then we also did a little donuts for donors. So if you were a registered organ donor and you showed us like on your license, or you could show us another way, we would give you a donut. And if you decided to register to become an organ donor while we were there, you would get a donut. So it was cute. It was fun. And that was kind of the first one that kicked it off.
Know your audience, right?
Exactly.
Know your audience. Well, real quick, we have just like 30 seconds, a little over to talk, but tell me, Nicole, if someone wants to start a chapter at their college, specifically anyone in Washington, because there isn't a chapter in Washington State, how do they go about it?
Any high school, college, or graduate school student that wants to start a chapter should head to sodanational.org/students. From there, you will take an eligibility quiz, find a team of 3 students, and then submit an official application. Once we accept you, you have access to free resources like event funding, how-to guides, mentorship, and supplies.
Perfect. Well, we'll put your information below your name. Thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it. And just let me know how I can help in the future in any way with awareness. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lisa.